Okay, class. Good day. Ah, boy, here we are. This is going to mark. I know this isn't your problem. It is web courses. This is going to mark the third time that I've had to record this lecture because web courses has insufficient bandwidth. Apparently, I get too verbose and can't accommodate my actual lectures. So I'm going to have to give you an abbreviated version of this, which I think is doing a grave disservice to you all. Because the Art of War, in my estimation, is one of the seminal works of literature in the history of man, and I mean that in a very sincere way because it speaks to the human condition. General Sun Tzu was an amazing man, and we'll cover that, of course. But just a little bit of a preface here. Um, we only have this is so big. We only have one class, one lecture, and it's divided into two, but one lecture on the art of war. Now, just to put this in perspective, I have written about a dozen years ago, and I still have it in the can, so to speak, a full semester uh, course, a full curriculum for the art of war. And even at that, it is insufficient to the depth and breadth of the content. Now, just to review, remember in the first part of the semester, we were dealing with goal orientation. Now we're dealing with self improvement. And I don't think there could be a better spokesperson for that concept than General Sun Tzu. He's a remarkable man. We'll cover a little bit of history here, but just to tell you, he did something remarkable. We're not talking back here when he was operating, when he was alive and uh, practicing his generalship. We're not talking about the country of China. China did not exist. It was a bunch of little city states, and they were always bickering with each other, looking for advantage, looking for conquering in land and goods, et cetera, and trade routes and alliances, et cetera. It was just a bunch of individual warlords, and each one of them had their own private mercenary army. Well, General Sun Tzu, for any of you veterans out there, or any of you familiar with the military, he did something rather remarkable. It's virtually unheard of. But he started out as a conscript. In other words, his village was conquered and he was simply absorbed and thrown into the army that did the conquering of that particular warlord. Well, he was an astute observer of the human condition. He watched, he studied, he learned, he wrote things down. He took advantage of situations. And in very short order, he went from being just a buck private, as we call it in the armed forces today, just the lowest of the lows, to the general of the armies. And because the city states were always bickering with each other, his services as a mercenary general, was in great demand. Um, his observations are tremendously insightful. Just a little history here, personal history, guys. I've been studying the art of war. I was introduced to the art of war when I was about 6 or 7 years old, and that was in 1960, 61. Yeah, yeah, baby, I am that old. Um, anyway, I was in judo, and it was given to me by a friend of our family's. And it's a disarmingly small pamphlet. It really doesn't look like a great deal. As a matter of fact, you can get a copy that'll fit right into your breast pocket. But it's not a book that's meant to be read cover to cover. It's a book of tenets or principles. And you can read it cover to cover. Certainly, it won't take you more than about an hour, but it's meant to be sitting around so that you can open it to any given page, read the calligraphy, read the statements that are made, and then close it and contemplate what was being said. Well, the art of war is as relevant today as it was back then. Uh, it's an amazingly, and here's the word again, disarmingly insightful work. Uh, one of the amazing things that I've noticed in the 60 years or so that I've been studying the art of war, and I have been diligently studying it, I think about it all the time. Whenever I encounter situations or circumstances in my life, I boom immediately flash back to what General Sun Tzu said about that situation and how to handle it. And it has saved my backside more than once. Not physically, but me just not following that particular path that my emotions were wanting me to go follow. Uh, One of the disarming, and there's the third time I've used that word, uh, things about the art of war is that it makes sense. It makes sense on a very superficial level. When you read, and we're going to cover some of the tenets. Matter of fact, the second part of the lecture is kind of the top 10. We'll just go through those, and I'll give you some examples. But it makes perfect sense, even to a boy of 7 years old. You read it and you go, "Oh yeah, okay," and then you go about your business. It's only after you read it again and again and again and again, and you encounter more and you mature and you begin to gain some experience in life, that the meaning, the true meaning, and I'll put the parentheses, true meanings, plural, is revealed. And you see that what he's talking about that made sense to you when you were way back when, it has a very different meaning now, and it's much more profound. And even here at the tender age of 66, I'm still learning from this. I am still discovering things. Matter of fact, I'll tell you this. There have been days, even after the 60 years I've been at this, there are days when I'll just pick up a copy or I'll just flip through on my phone because I've got a copy. I've got copies of the Art of War everywhere in all my offices, bathrooms, and it's on my phone. And I'll just pop open a page and I'll go, wait a minute, I've never read that before. Well, yes, I had, but it has meaning now because situations and circumstances in my life has drawn it into being meaningful. So anyway, rather than just continue to jabber on, because every time I do that, I'm using up a precious bandwidth, and I don't want to go ahead and record this thing another time. So let's get into this, shall we? Let's talk about some of the facts of the art of war. Well, it was written about 500 BC, and it was written to educate and impress the nobility. Well, why was that? Because General Sun Tzu needed a way to get his foot in the door with the noble class, and because he had no royal blood or no noble blood at all, he was just a commoner. I think his father was a rice farmer. That was it, nothing. So. Uh, he wrote this, and it's a compilation of everything that he learned. He managed to write it down. And by the way, something needs to be said. There's a quest right now, and has been ongoing since the late 18th century, to find in the now country of China, in all the little villages, the oldest known copies or translations of the Art of War. We're going to get into that here in just a second, because we don't know exactly how much of the original Art of War can be attributed to the great general himself, because of a lot of his generals and a lot of his proteges continued on and added to the book. So we really don't know. If this resonates with you, just go online and don't rely upon any one translation. Go ahead and get several and see if you can get the flavor rather than the specific words and the actual diction that was used. Well, it was, and it worked, because he was in great demand. He made a fortune because he was extraordinarily gifted, and his gift was his ability to predict people and predict circumstances. Well, here again, the book is expanded possibly to 82 chapters. The way that it was originally constructed is, if you've ever seen the Chinese language is a pictographic language, which means that it's character driven. There are small characters, main characters, base characters, if you will, and then there are other amendment characters that refine it or expand it or whatever. But each one of the little refining adjutant type characterological additions changed the meaning of the word albeit subtly. And frankly, that requires some explanation because a single Chinese character can represent a letter. It can also represent a word. It can also represent a sentence or a paragraph. It can actually represent an entire concept. So it's a very interesting language, very different from ours. Um, Even though the English language is complex enough. All right, let's get to this. It was in the late 18th century, even though this thing has been around for 2,500 years. It was only in the late 18th century that a French Jesuit, a priest, discovered and translated the text. He heard about it from one of his translators. The problem is that, remember, we're talking about little city states and regional dialects. The text as it was could not be read by the Jesuits' translator. So what they had to do was find someone who spoke and read that regional dialect to translate it into this other regional dialect, who translated it for the French Jesuit. But then the French Jesuit, in order to write it down and to make note of it, he translated it into Latin. And then he translated that into French. So I think you see where I'm going with this. The phrase "lost in translation" kind of comes to mind. Anybody played that telephone game back when you were a kid, in class, where somebody in the very back there reads a little message, just one sentence or so, and then they whisper, ear to ear to ear, student to student, and then all the way up front, and then the person up front stands up and tells the class what the message was. And it's often amusing because more often than not, it doesn't bear any resemblance to the original message, because we tend to embellish and modify and refine and translate ourselves. So anyway, that's why there's this quest trying to go back as far as it can to the original text. And the way it was actually written, I think this is another interesting piece. It was reputedly burned in the pictographic language onto chopsticks, and the chopsticks were about 18 inches long, and it was burned in to each chopstick, each lesson. And the chopsticks themselves were bound together on silk threads, and then it could be rolled up into a large scroll and put into a cover and taken from place to place. And this is what General Sun Tzu used to brief his generals and to teach his lessons and to teach his troops. And it was said to have become a favorite of Napoleon, who was another amazing person, Napoleon Bonaparte. Got to say this, guys. I'm not into hero worship, and I'm not especially starry-eyed about anybody. As a matter of fact, I've become pretty cynical in my dotage here. But Napoleon Bonaparte did something very closely akin. He shares something with General Sun Tzu, and that is that both of them were conscripts. Both of them rose through the ranks. Both of them were buck privates. They were simply captured and, for all intents and purposes, enslaved. They were brought into the army under force, under duress. And Napoleon was also a student of the human condition. And it was only in the late 18th century, which is when Napoleon suddenly came out of nowhere. He wasn't an imposing figure either. He was barely 5 feet tall, and he was a little pudgy guy, a little fat guy. He wasn't some huge, muscle-bound Arnold kind of a guy. No, he was not particularly imposing, but he was amazingly adept at understanding human behavior. And so he rose to be general of the armies. And in fact, he conquered damn near the entire known world at the height of his power, until he met his Waterloo. So let's get into a little mutual philosophy here, because I don't want to get too much into the weeds. Just a couple of things here, just to give you a flavor as to what we're going to be talking about. Napoleon says, even enemies will help each other if they are together in a boat that is in trouble. Yeah. Okay, say you and I are in a boat. We've both got swords. We're looking to cut each other up. We're looking to kill each other. But the boat is sinking. We don't trust each other because we're sworn enemies. But Well, doggone it, the boat's sinking. Look, okay, look, tell you what, I'll put my sword down if you do the same, and we'll bail the boat. And you see that? We'll go for that island over there. You see that island over there? Yeah, we'll go over there, and if we make it, then we can pick up our swords and kill each other. How's that sound? Okay, so there's distrust and mistrust and everything else, and you're looking at each other with suspicion, but you bail the boat and you're struggling, and it turns from being you against him, the two of you against each other, is the two of you against the sea, two of you against a sinking boat, the two of you against the environment. So you get there and you bail, you almost get swamped again, you bail, you paddle, and eventually you make it through the breakers, you get washed up on the beach. Question: how likely are you to be willing to kill each other at this point? You have just been through a major ordeal. You have shared this ordeal. You have overcome it together, and the answer to the question is probably much less inclined. So, which you're probably more likely, you probably like to say, "Look, I've got my sword. You got yours. What do you say? Fair enough. You go that way. I'm going this way. See you around the campus." Um, and while this may sound a little strange, you have seen this before, whether you know it or not. I'm thinking back to the last lecture of The Hero with a Thousand Faces, The Hero's Journey. Think about Denzel Washington in Remember the Titans, and Matthew McConaughey in We Are Marshall. Exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. If you go back and you watch both of those films, you see that both of those coaches were put in amazingly untenable situations, and yet they use their skills to change the aura. Where it was in Denzel's case, it was racial discord within the team. They were segregated, and they looked at each other with suspicion. And then he came in and upset the apple cart and began to forcibly integrate them. And then it became not the team against the team, it became the team against Denzel. And then as they got to know each other more and more and more, it became the team and Denzel against the opponents. So anyway, and the same thing with McConaughey. And I think we'll both all agree, guys. Personally, professionally, I would not have wanted to have assumed either of those jobs, because man, you were walking into a hornet's nest, and chances were that it was not going to have a good outcome. So anyway, keep that one in mind. And then he goes on to say, similarly shared ideas and identification bind people together into a useful, cohesive team. Here he's talking about you got to know your peeps. People are there because of reasons, plural, once again, plural. There are many reasons. Some of them may be shared. Some of them may be totally idiosyncratic. In other words, it's unique to that individual. That's the reason that they're on the team. But you have to know that. But the similarly shared ideas and identification bind people together, and you can use this to your advantage in creating teamwork. And in the military, we called it esprit de corps. All right. Couple of definitions here. I'll try to make this Western definition as well. Let's talk about the environment. The environment is everything. It is the universe. It is all things all the time. He says the prevailing conditions determine what plans you can undertake. Yeah, you can't be a one-trick pony, and you've got to have contingency plans, but the environment is going to be a factor in that. He goes on to say, these conditions are too big. Hey, that's T-O-O, Tom. Okay, I've got to go spank my grad assistant here. These conditions are too big in general to be controlled by people, hence the use of the Chinese character for heaven. So it's everything. You need to understand them and take them into account. Now, I told you I'd give you a Western translation for this. Consider this, the environment, the world of the possible. It's everything is possible. You ever watch those ancient alien shows, that guy with the wild, crazy hair? He always asks the same question. Isn't it possible that, whoa, yes, of course it's possible. Damn near everything is possible. Come on, of course it is. That's the wrong question to be asking. You should be asking what is probable, and then we could have a different discussion. But if you start with the possible, this is everything. This is the earth, the sky, the water, the mountains, the everything. And it's really speaks to a Zen approach. And the Zen approach, here, let me just try to paint a mental image for you. Say that I'm coming up at a pebble. I've got a pebble in my hand and I'm coming up to a pond. And the pond is big enough for a little tiny boat on the other side of the pond. I can see that. So I just take a pebble and I throw it into the pond. And there's the point of impact, boom. And then there are concentric rings going out towards the edge. Well, I can look at that. I can look at that point of impact and the concentric rings, and I can look at it with the environment. And in the background, I see uh, just kind of grassy plains with some shrubbery, etc. And I can start to walk around the pond. I'm still looking at that point of impact. And now now say I'm at the 3 o'clock position. I was at the 12. Now I'm at 3 o'clock. And I'm looking, and now I see some gently rolling hills, still looking at the point of impact and the rings. Continue my walk. Now I'm at the 6 o'clock down here, and I'm looking back, and I see that the point of impact and the rings, but in the background it's snow-capped mountains and peaks, etc. And continue my walk around to the 9 o'clock position, and still looking at the pond with the point of impact and the rings. The context has changed, the environment has changed, and now it is a small hut with some bamboo and a little tiny boat tied up at a little tiny dock. So this is interesting, but you see, what you're doing is you're looking at the possible. You've taken everything into account. You weren't content to simply stand at 12 o'clock and say, okay, this is it. Everything is flat plains. And no. You didn't look behind you, and you didn't look to the right or to the left. So the context changes, and as a consequence, the prevailing conditions determine what plans you can undertake. This applies to everything in life. One size never, ever, ever fits all. Ever. Despite what you're being told. No, people are not content to be the same. People always want to be better. If not better than others, at least better than themselves. They're not content to simply sit around and vegetate. All right, so that's the environment. That's the possible. Well, let's break it down a little bit, because that's a little bit too much to take in. So let's talk about the situation. This is similar in effect to the environment, but on a smaller scale. Here's the key that you and your opponent can control if you know how. Translating the situation into Western lingo, the situation is the probable. Now, what constitutes the probable? Let me give you something that I've always taught my students. Whereas before, in the environment, we were looking at everything: the sky, the pond, the dock, the mountains, the plains, the prairies, the hills, the little boat, everything. It's too much. Too much. You don't have that much time, nor that much discretionary. Uh, you don't have that much discretion to be able to take everything into account. So you need to somehow truncate it. You need to figure out a way to make it a little bit more narrow. And this is where the situation comes in, because now we're talking about a discrete subset, which is known as the probable. And the way that I always describe the probable is that pebble, it's the point of impact in the pond and the first 3, 4, 5 rings away from the point of impact. That is probably what's going to happen in any given situation. The other stuff is interesting, perhaps, and if you have additional time, then you might want to indulge yourself and go to the 6th, 7th, or 8th ring. But you don't have to take into account everything heaven and earth. You need to plan for what will probably happen. And I'm hoping you trainers and coaches are filling in the blanks here, and you potential physical therapists and medicos. When you're talking about what's possible, a lot of stuff can go wrong in a human body. Okay, you need to know what's probably wrong and what's probably going to help. So this is another way of looking at things. It's not just getting from A to B, damn the torpedoes. It is taking things into account by selectively including and excluding things. So, but remember this, It's on a smaller scale that you and your opponent can control. Because sometimes I get asked, hey, doc, look, why do I need this? This sounds like a bunch of BS. So, oh, okay, yeah, that's true. That's true. It probably is if you don't believe it. But let me caution you that if you come across somebody in a competition of any kind, if you come across someone who is a student of the art of war and General Sun Tzu, guys, they're going to steal your lunch money. And there's not a damn thing you can do about it. They're going to take your lunch money and look you dead in the eye. And you won't even know what just happened. So, one of the things, I'll take a little aside here. One of the things you need to understand about General Sun Tzu is he always did his homework. A hallmark of General Sun Tzu is that in any competition, I'm going to know more about you and the situation than you know about me and the situation. I'm going to make a point of it. I'm going to do my homework. I'm going to front load everything. I'm going to front load my training, my practice, conditioning, training, working out, all of this. It's all my trial and error. My heavy lifting is going to be done before I ever even get to where we're competing. And that's one of the things that you probably heard from the art of war, that every battle is won or lost before it is ever fought. And that is absolutely categorically true. So, let's talk something else here. A hallmark of General Sun Tzu is leadership. He said it allows you to make good plans because of your perception, foresight, emotional intelligence, and objectivity. Now, we could go into each one of those, but just take those with a grain of salt and kind of get the flavor. Because remember, translated from one dialect to the next, to the next, to the next, into Latin, into Middle French, and then onward and onward. By the way, Art of War is required reading in almost every military academy on the planet. It's been translated in virtually every language on the planet. So, required reading. You've got to know this stuff. Anyway, what about leadership? Well, it allows you to implement your plans because you control your troops. They have confidence in you, and they know they can trust you, and there's respect, and it's earned. And a hallmark of General Sun Tzu's leadership, it is always leading from the front, and it is always leading by example. Always. Always. He's not one of these guys who sits behind a desk with his feet up, barking orders. No, he's the guy sitting there next to you, digging a trench with you. So that's leadership. And when you see a leader, I often get asked about this. How do you know who the leaders are in a team? Well, I'll tell you how you know. Sometimes, a matter of fact, more often than not, it ain't the guy or the gal with the little armband. That may be the captain, but that might not be your leader. When the stuff hits the fan, take a look to whom everyone turns. That is your leader. It's a good idea to kind of make the distinction between being a captain and being a leader. Now, hopefully, if you're wearing the armband and people are turning to you and you are that person, best of all worlds. Let's talk about art. Notice, if you will, the name of the work is The Art of War. It's not The Science of War, because he didn't want this to be a cookbook. He wants this to help you improve yourself, that you can be diagnostic in a situation. Here, I'm going to make this medical for all you medicos that are and future medicos. You need to be diagnostic, but that's not enough. It's not enough to get you through, and it's not enough to prevail. You need to be differentially diagnostic. Okay, that means a much higher standard. But more than that, if you're diagnostic and you can learn to be differentially diagnostic, eventually you can put two and two together, and you can be predictive. You can predict what's going to happen, certainly quicker than the person across from you and their team. You can make a decision with much less information and make it quicker. Wow, I was just thinking, I was reading some Napoleon the other day. Actually, it was some quotes of his, and one of them I've just found fascinating, because he said, the most important thing, which makes it the most precious thing, is the ability to decide. Wow. I think that sums it up too, because if you look at the history of both General Sun Tzu and Napoleon Bonaparte, they were not waffly, wishy-washy guys. They were deliberate. They were decisive. They made a decision and they went for it. They were risk takers, but they had done their homework. They did all of their homework before they made that decision, but once they had made that decision, it was done. So anyway, that's just a little something. Okay, the art is the skill and the ability to implement your strategy. So, right, the skill to play to your strengths and preparation and coordination are essential here. What is he really talking about? Well, he's talking about your leadership style and your leadership um, ability. Really, it's a sum total, and it's going to be a reflection of your temperament and your personality, and more than anything, it's going to be a reflection of your character. And this is the thing that's going to be trusted and revered by your peeps, or not, as the case may be. You might be a total jerk, but anyway, this is where he says you can stand the best chance, the best probability of becoming a better leader. All right, let's just talk a couple of things here, and then we'll sum this up here because I'm getting on. It looks like 30 minutes. Oh, so we've already been yakking for 30 minutes. I wonder if this is going to download. I hope so. Anyway, recurring ideas. Just a couple that you need to know. I told you that there is depth in this, that it makes sense on a superficial level, but it's often misinterpreted. This is one of the most often misinterpreted. General Sun Tzu repeatedly explains that you should make yourself well defended. Now, to most people, you shrug your shoulders and go, "Oh yeah, okay. So what does that mean? It means sitting behind thick stone walls and big iron gates, and maybe hiding in a fortress under a blanket in a dark room with no friends." But that's not it at all. That's not at all what he's talking about. That may be necessary, but what he's really talking about is knowing your situation. That is being well defended. You know your opponent. That's being well defended. Knowing your opponent and the situation better than they know you or it. That is being well defended. So knowledge is power. And that's why he emphasizes it so much, because you've got to know everything there is to know before you hit the field. Don't let your peeps go out there and experience something for the first time. Expose them to it in practice, conditioning, training, and working out. Do it beforehand. Heavy lifting and trial and error occurs before competition. And victory comes from taking advantage of your opponent's actions. Yeah, sure. But that also, if you look at it a little bit deeper, you don't have to strike the first blow. Sometimes you can wait, and any of you martial artists out there know exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes people will commit, and once they commit their energies, it's directed. Then the world is your oyster. Then you can decide what to do. You can stand there, and that's probably not going to be a good idea because you're going to get plowed over. You can step back, which is just going to delay the inevitable. You can walk, step to the side, to step to either side, and that will probably get you at least out of harm's way momentarily. Or you can do something totally off the wall, and you can step into them. You can attack. Wow. That's unexpected, and generally, that's going to get you that momentary flinch and the stop. You know, we talk about flight or fight all the time. Well, there's a third F too, and it's one that's less talked about, but it's one that's by far more common, and it's freeze. And I'm not talking about Boeing freezing and deer in the headlights. I'm talking about a momentary. Hey, wait, just that. Boom. Sometimes that's all it takes. You don't believe me? Try hitting 100-mile-an-hour fastball. You better damn sure be decisive there. And matter of fact, you better be decisive by the time it leaves the pitcher's fingertips. So, anyway, victory comes from taking advantage of your opponent's actions. Yeah, you can be in a very, very effective counterpuncher because some people just go all out. And it's interesting to see that the change in tactics in warfare. One of the reasons that Napoleon, I don't know how much of military history you involve yourself, but after reading General Sun Tzu, Napoleon really made a name for himself because of the tactics that he used. Up until then, it was all Braveheart, you know. Everybody with swords and sharpened sticks and pikes and whatnot, and running at each other, and boom, they just run headlong into each other, hack, 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 stab, 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 and then the last man standing wins. Well, that was just a war of attrition, and that wasn't very effective. So what Napoleon did was he devised Napoleonic squares, where there was these little enclaves of special soldiers backing each other up. And anyway, it revolutionized warfare, and he that's the reason that he became as effective as he was back in his day. All right, and then, well, here we go. This is a way to say goodbye to this. Straightforward attacks are hard to win. That's right. Sometimes you go from the side. Any of you saw The Last Samurai? Remember what happened? They led them, they drew them in, and then they lit fires behind them with fire arrows and all the oil and kerosene, and then they attacked from the sides. And boy, whoa! Well, we all know how that went, how that ended. Having a conflict is bad, yes. And here's kind of a parting shot for the end of the first part of the lecture. General Sun Tzu would have thought that killing people was and actually fighting was a farcical waste of time and resources. He'd never do that. Look, he knew that his resources, because of all the little fiefdoms, etc., were finite. You only had so much. And to go out and waste them trying to defend or trying to attack a place, no, what he would do is he would capture places. Any of you play chess? Well, chess represents the Western mindset of warfare. What do we have? Take a look at it. It's 32 pieces, 16 aside. You got pawns, knights, bishops, rook, queen, king. Yeah. And you move and take turns, take turns, take turns. Well, every time you take a piece, you've killed that person. And so at the very end of the game, typically out of the 32 pieces facing each other, you've got probably 6 players. That means 6 people manage not to get killed. Everybody else is dead. But we accept that. We go, yeah, well, so what? At least I won. Well, careful what you wish for. The Asian counterpart to that is a game called Go, G-O, Go. It made a revival back in the 80s. I'm not sure whether any of you have heard about this, but a game called Pente. And it's a large grid, and you play with these colored stones, and you place stones on intersecting grid marks where the vertical and horizontal lines cross. And no one dies. But what you do is you cut off avenues of advancement and you cut off avenues of retreat, and you surround armies. And what he would do typically is he would surround an army and cut off the avenue of retreat, cut off supply lines, and cut off any avenues of advance, and just let them sit for a little while. And eventually they would probably sue for peace. And what he would do, rather than going in there and hacking and killing everybody, he would say, wow, so you guys surrendering then, right? Okay. So I guess you guys are unemployed. You guys looking for a job? And I'm saying that kind of tongue-in-cheek because what he would do is absorb the army and all of their assets to come work for him. And in very, very short order, his army grew to something that was quite formidable as far as the city-state armies were and the warlord armies were. Well, he says having a conflict is bad. Yeah, because much better to conquer by strategy. But having a long conflict is always a disaster, even if you're victorious in the end. Another bit of military history is a thing called a Pyrrhic victory. Pyrrhic victory. General Pyrrhus. He was being attacked back in ancient Greece, and he marshaled all of his resources and went out to meet the invaders, and he lost every single man, but he won. I know that sounds bad, but he prevailed, even though he lost everything. He lost his army, and he lost all of their resources, armor and arms, etc. And that's what's known as a Pyrrhic victory. In other words, you won, but at what cost? My gosh. Okay, well, let's gear up here and get into the 10. I've just selected 10 popular tenets that we're going to talk about in the second part of this lecture, and it could probably give you a little bit better idea to flesh out some of these examples. So anyway, that's enough for number one. Let's get on to lecture two.